The Christmas party glittered like a lie. Crystal chandeliers poured warm gold over marble floors, and the air smelled like expensive perfume, fresh pine, and secrets that would never make it past midnight. Rome's elite filled the grand ballroom. Politicians, bankers, fashion moguls, laughing too loudly, smiling too carefully. She didn't belong there. She knew it the moment she stepped inside. Her dress was elegant, but borrowed. Her invitation real, but accidental. She was meant to drop something off and leave. 5 minutes, maybe less. That was before the room went quiet. Not silent, just aware. Conversations softened. Laughter hesitated. Even the orchestra missed a beat. Because he had arrived. Italy's most feared mafia king didn't announce himself. He never needed to. His presence moved through the room like gravity, subtle, inescapable. Men straightened without realizing why. Women glanced once, then looked away, instincts screaming caution. He was tall, immaculate, calm in a way that came only from absolute control, and his eyes, dark, sharp, assessing, found her instantly. That was the moment everything changed. She felt it before she understood it. That impossible sensation of being seen too clearly. As if the noise, the lights, the entire Christmas fantasy dissolved, leaving only the two of them standing on opposite ends of fate. She turned away. Big mistake. A shadow crossed the floor behind her. No footsteps. No warning. Just the quiet certainty of someone who owned the space he occupied. He stopped close enough that she could feel his warmth. Then he leaned in. His voice was low, calm, deadly controlled. "Tonight," he whispered, "you will hear many lies." Her breath caught. "But this," he continued, his lips barely inches from her ear, "is the only promise that matters." She froze. "I will protect you," he said softly. "Even from yourself." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She turned, finally meeting his gaze. And what she saw there wasn't hunger. It was certainty, the kind that terrified entire cities. Before she could speak, before she could ask his name or demand an explanation, he straightened and stepped back, already fading into the crowd. But his final words followed her like a sentence carved in stone. "You should leave now," he said. "Because once you stay, there is no escaping what's already begun." And as the orchestra swelled again, and the Christmas lights glittered brighter than before, she realized the most dangerous truth of all. She wasn't sure she wanted to escape. By the time she could breathe again, he was gone. Not vanished, positioned. She felt him before she saw him, the way the room subtly reorganized itself around his presence. Waiters adjusted their paths. Security stiffened without turning their heads. Even the laughter changed pitch, as if everyone had instinctively agreed not to draw his attention. She stood near the edge of the ballroom, fingers tight around a champagne flute she hadn't tasted. Italy's most feared mafia king. The title surfaced in her mind uninvited. She hadn't known his name when she walked in, but she knew the reputation. Everyone did. A man whispered about in courtrooms and back rooms. A man whose silence carried more weight than another man's gun. She finally saw him again, across the room. He stood with 3 men who looked powerful until they stood next to him. Tailored suits. Perfect posture. None of them spoke while he listened. When he nodded once, the conversation ended. Not because it was finished, but because he was. Her pulse raced. She tried to tell herself it was coincidence, that men like him noticed everything, and she was simply another face in a crowded room. Then she heard his name. It passed from one guest to another like a controlled burn. Soft, careful, always followed by a pause. Respect, fear, calculation. A woman beside her leaned into her date and whispered, "That's him." The date didn't ask who. He doesn't raise his voice. The woman continued quietly. He doesn't have to. If he makes a promise, it's already done. The words wrapped around her spine like ice. She remembered the whisper again. "I will protect you, even from yourself." Why would a man like that say something like that to her? She shifted, intending to leave, now, while she still could. But as she turned toward the exit, her path was gently, politely blocked by a server. "Apologies," the server said, eyes flicking past her shoulder. Just a moment. A moment for what? She followed the server's gaze. He was looking at her. Not casually, not in passing, intentionally. Their eyes locked again, and this time there was no crowd between them. No music loud, enough to blur the tension. His expression didn't change, but something sharpened. Recognition. Her stomach dropped. That was when it hit her. This wasn't the first time he'd seen her. Memory flashed back in fragments. Walking home late one night, a black car slowing near the curb. A courthouse hallway where she'd felt watched. A business deal she'd thought was insignificant suddenly falling through without explanation. She'd thought those moments were coincidences. They weren't. Across the room, he lifted his glass slightly, not a toast. A confirmation. The message was clear and terrifying in its simplicity. I know who you are. Her breath turned shallow. Every instinct screamed danger. But beneath it pulsed something. Worse, inevitable curiosity. Because if Italy's most feared man already knew her, then the whisper at the Christmas party hadn't been spontaneous. It had been planned. And as he turned away again, disappearing once more into his world of power and shadows, she realized the truth she couldn't unlearn. She hadn't caught his attention tonight. She had walked into a story that had started long before she arrived. And whatever role he had chosen for her, he had never once considered letting her walk away. The truth settled slowly, like snow that looked soft until it buried everything underneath. She wasn't supposed to be here. The realization came not with panic, but with clarity. The kind that made her notice details she'd ignored before. The way every guest moved with confidence. The way names were greeted with familiarity. The way wealth spoke its own language in quiet, effortless tones. She didn't speak that language. Her heels weren't painful because they were new. They were painful because they weren't hers. The dress fit beautifully, but it carried no history, no power, no inheritance. It was borrowed. Elegance in a room built on legacy. She drifted toward the edge of the ballroom, pretending to admire a towering Christmas tree, decorated in gold and ivory. Beneath it, gifts weighted with embossed cards. Family names she recognized from headlines and scandals. Her name would never be printed like that. She'd come tonight because someone else couldn't. A favor. A last-minute substitution. Just drop the documents, smile politely, and leave. She'd planned to disappear before dessert. Instead, she'd been noticed by the one man who never overlooked anything. A waiter passed by carrying a silver tray, and she caught her reflection in the mirrored wall, behind him. For a second, she didn't see herself. She saw the girl she'd been before survival, taught her restraint. Before bills replaced dreams. Before she learned how invisible people stayed alive. This world wasn't built for invisibility. It was built for ownership. She overheard fragments of conversation as she moved. Old families, generational seats, names that opened doors, then something else. The guest list was locked weeks ago. Her steps slowed. There were no changes, a man said confidently. He approved it personally. Her heart stuttered. There was only one man in the room who required no further explanation. A woman laughed softly. Of course he did. He knows every name that walks through those doors, every name. The thought made her skin prickle. She reached the hallway near the private lounge, intending to slip out quietly, when voices stopped her again. Low, controlled, dangerous. Security. Double-check the list, one of them murmured. Another replied, already did, all confirmed. A pause. Then, no, the second voice corrected. There is one exception. Her breath caught. Her name was added manually. The hallway felt suddenly too narrow. She wasn't on the original invitation list. Silence followed, heavy, loaded. Does he know? The first voice asked. The reply came without hesitation. He's the one who added her. Her pulse roared in her ears. She backed away before she could be seen, heart racing as the truth crashed into her all at once. She hadn't been invited by accident. She had been allowed. Across the room, she spotted him again through the glass doors of the private lounge. He stood, alone now, reviewing something on a tablet handed to him by an aide. She couldn't see the screen, but she knew what was on it. A list. Names that mattered. Names that belonged. And somewhere among them, hers. Her name, written where it had never been before. Not because of wealth. Not because of power. but because Italy's most feared mafia king had decided she belonged to his knight. And as he looked up, meeting her gaze once more, she understood the final chilling truth. You couldn't remove your name from a list like that. Not once the king himself had written it in. The warning came without urgency. That was what made it dangerous. She felt it before she heard it. A subtle shift in the air, the quiet retreat of people who sensed something powerful moving toward them. Conversations thinned, laughter softened. The space around her cleared as if the room itself had learned obedience. Then his voice reached her again. You're standing in the wrong place. Low, calm, precise. She turned. He was closer than she expected. Close enough that she could see the faint scar along his knuckle, the disciplined stillness in his posture. No wasted movement. No visible threat. Just certainty, worn like a tailored suit. I was about to leave, she said. It was the truth, or at least it had been. His eyes searched her face, not rudely, not possessively, but thoroughly, as if he were confirming something already known. That would be wise, he replied. Relief fluttered through her chest. Then he finished the sentence. But you won't. The words landed softly, irrevocably. She swallowed. You don't know that. A faint curve touched his mouth. Not a smile, a recognition. I know patterns, he said. And I know you. The last 3 words tightened something deep in her chest. I don't belong here, she said more firmly now. You said it yourself. This isn't my world. No, he agreed, it isn't. The admission surprised her. This room was built for people who inherit power, he continued, who wear confidence because it was handed to them young and sharpened over time. His gaze held hers steadily. You had to earn yours. Her breath caught. That wasn't a compliment anyone in this room would understand. But she did. Which is why, he said, lowering his voice further, you should leave before someone decides to test you. Someone like you? She asked before she could stop herself. The silence stretched. Then quietly, no. His answer wasn't defensive. It was honest. Someone like me already decided to protect you. The words wrapped around her, equal parts shield and chain. Why? She asked. For the first time, he hesitated. Not long, just enough. Because, he said, this room doesn't forgive mistakes, and you're standing too close to several of them. Music swelled nearby, a Christmas waltz drifting across the marble floor. Guests began to move, again, unaware of the thin line being drawn inches from her fate. He took a step back, restoring distance. I've given you your warning, he said. Take it. She nodded slowly. She meant to walk away. She meant to choose safety, obscurity, the life she knew how to survive. But as she turned toward the exit, she felt it, the pull, not from him alone, but from the truth. He'd exposed, that she had already been seen, and that once seen by a man like him, invisibility was no longer an option. Behind her, his voice followed, quiet, inevitable. Don't misunderstand, he said. This was the last easy choice you'll get tonight. Her hand paused on the door. She didn't turn back. She didn't leave either. And somewhere behind her, Italy's most feared mafia king watched calmly. Because he already knew the ending of this moment. She would stay, and from this point on, every step would carry consequences neither of them could undo. The party continued around her, oblivious to the invisible tether that had wrapped itself around her wrist, pulling her into an orbit she didn't want to acknowledge. She moved through the room, glass in hand, every step careful, calculated. She wanted to vanish into the crowd, to dissolve into the glittering chaos of wealth and light. But no matter how many faces she passed, how many conversations she pretended to join, she felt it. The eyes, they followed her, not from across the room, not from someone glancing in passing. They followed with intention. Patience. The sort of awareness that made your skin crawl in the most familiar way. Every time she thought she'd escaped them, there he was, across the hall, by the balcony, near the bar. Somewhere she couldn't predict, yet always precise. She tried to convince herself it was coincidence, that the human mind often attributes patterns where none exist. But it wasn't coincidence. She could feel it in the subtle cues, the way waiters shifted their trays to avoid crossing his path with her, how guests instinctively gave a wider berth. Even the lights seemed to bow slightly, casting her in a sharper focus whenever he moved near. She turned a corner, hoping to catch a glimpse, to see if her mind was playing tricks. There he stood, leaning casually against a marble pillar, one hand resting on the stone like it belonged to him. Eyes dark, sharp, assessing. Her chest tightened. She tried to look away, to regain composure, but his gaze didn't waver. It followed her. Every step, every tilt of her head, every nervous adjustment of her dress. She realized it now. The whisper, the warning, the calculated distance. They were all part of the same strategy. He wasn't just powerful, he was methodical, observant, unrelenting. Her heart pounded, not in fear alone, but in a mix of fascination and dread. She had never felt this way before. Exposed yet invisible, vulnerable yet watched, scared yet undeniably noticed. She told herself she could ignore it. She told herself she would act normal. But it was impossible. Every time she met his eyes, a spark of understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement that she was not just a guest in his world. She was an anomaly, a question he intended to answer. She glanced around for an ally, anyone who might notice her discomfort, anyone who could help. But no one saw what she saw. No one felt the gravity pulling her attention, dictating the pace of her heart. Then, without warning, he moved. Just a fraction, a subtle shift, closing a distance invisible to anyone else. And just like that, the sensation of being watched became suffocatingly real. Her breath hitched. She wanted to run, to disappear, to hide in the smallest corner of the world. But the thought of escaping the weight of his gaze, of leaving this magnetic, dangerous force unanswered, felt equally impossible. He didn't approach. Not yet. He simply observed, patient, calculating, unwavering. And in that moment she understood a terrifying truth. Wherever she went in this room, whatever she did, his eyes would always find her. The crowd continued to laugh, dance, and toast. She moved among them, but she was no longer part of it. She had become an unwitting spectator in a dangerous game where the stakes were invisible, but the predator was unmistakably real. And from the shadows, Italy's most feared mafia king let her know, silently, without a word. I am always watching. The orchestra shifted into a slow waltz, its melody curling through the ballroom like smoke, seductive and dangerous. Guests paired off, their steps elegant and rehearsed, glasses clinking lightly as the music carried them into the center of the room. She stayed on the outskirts, reluctant to join. Her heels pinched her toes, her borrowed dress felt heavier with every passing second, and her chest tightened with a tension she could no longer deny. She was trapped between curiosity and fear, caught in the gravity of a man who had made her feel both exposed and strangely important. Then he appeared, not as a shadow, not as a glance across the room. He was there, in front of her, his hand extended with effortless command. His eyes, dark and commanding, held hers in a gaze that brooked no refusal. "You dance?" he asked, his voice low, smooth, almost teasing, but threaded with unmistakable authority. She hesitated, heart hammering. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to retreat. But something inside her, a mixture of fascination and the nagging realization that he controlled more than the room, pushed her forward. Slowly, carefully, she placed her hand in his. The touch sent a shiver up her arm. Not fear, not entirely. Something else. A silent acknowledgement of the power in this gesture. They moved together into the center of the ballroom. Heads turned. Whispers followed them like drifting smoke. But she didn't care. She only felt the weight of him, the subtle strength beneath, his tailored suit, the way he guided her steps without force, as if the floor itself obeyed his will. "Easy," he murmured. "Relax, let the music guide you." She tried. She really did. But every beat of the music reminded her of the warning, of the whisper, of all the moments that had led her here tonight. Every sway of his arm, every step, every calculated glance reminded her she was no longer just a guest, and yet she couldn't deny the strange safety she felt. With him, danger became predictable, tension became anticipation, and fear became a thrill she hadn't experienced before. As the dance continued, he leaned close, just enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath against her ear. "Do you understand yet?" he asked softly. This is not just a dance." Her stomach tightened. I don't." He smiled faintly, a ghost of amusement, and then whispered, "Everything you do tonight, every choice, every hesitation, has consequences." Her steps faltered. She almost wanted to pull away. But the music, the crowd, the undeniable pull of his presence held her in place. A flicker of amusement passed through his eyes. "Good. You're learning quickly." The final notes of the waltz lingered like a warning, fading into the hum of conversation and clinking glasses. He guided her gently to a stop, bowing with perfect poise, but his gaze never left hers. "You may leave the dance," he said quietly. "But remember this, the consequences of tonight are just beginning." And as she stepped back, heart racing, she realized that the world she had known before this party no longer existed. Because one dance, one hand, one choice had already changed everything. And Italy's most feared mafia king had just ensured she understood that nothing in his presence was ever without purpose or peril. The ballroom had settled into its afterglow. Conversations resumed, laughter returned, and the clinking of glasses filled the air like delicate percussion. But she barely noticed. Her mind was tangled in the memory of his whisper, the promise that had seemed so impossible, so intoxicating and so terrifying all at once. She had been cautious, guarded, trying to rationalize every word, every glance, every step. But the longer she stood there, the heavier the weight of it pressed against her chest. It wasn't just a whisper. It wasn't just a warning. It was something else. Something she hadn't yet understood. And then he appeared again. Not abrupt, not invasive. Just there. He seemed to emerge from the shadows, the dim golden light of the chandeliers tracing the sharp lines of his face, highlighting the control and precision that marked him as a man accustomed to command. "You're thinking too hard," he said, his voice low, deliberate, almost patient. She swallowed. "About what?" He stepped closer, and the faint scent of his cologne, rich, dark, and unyielding, filled her senses. "About the words I whispered." Her pulse quickened. She had tried to suppress the memory, tried to tell herself she imagined significance where there was none. But now, with him standing there, intent and unwavering, she knew it had weight. She had known it the moment it left his lips. "You thought it was a threat," he continued, "didn't you?" She nodded, unwilling or unable to speak. "Fear is easy," he said softly. "It comes naturally when someone like me enters your life. But it wasn't fear I meant to inspire." Her breath caught. She wanted to challenge him, to demand clarity. But the calm certainty in his tone rooted her in place. "I promised protection," he said, leaning slightly closer, enough for the intimacy of it to burn, quietly. "Not because I am merciful, but because I have recognized something rare in you, something worth guarding, even against the world, and even against yourself." She stared at him, the words sinking slowly, like stones dropped into water. Protection. Recognition. Not power, not dominance. "So," she whispered, barely audible, "it wasn't a threat." He shook his head once. "No." The faintest curve of a smile touched his lips, almost imperceptible. It was a vow. Her mind spun. A vow. The kind of word heavy with intent. A word that carried weight in silence, in promises kept, in lives intertwined by choice and consequence. "And what happens if I—" She hesitated. "If I refuse it?" His gaze sharpened, piercing yet patient. "You can try. But a vow isn't something easily ignored. Once given, it demands acknowledgement. Not because it binds you, but because it reflects the truth you've yet to accept. Her heart pounded, but the fear had transformed into something else entirely, something dangerous and thrilling. She felt seen in a way she had never experienced, recognized for the strength she didn't even know she possessed. The music swelled nearby, distant, almost irrelevant, as the truth settled in her mind. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And Italy's most feared mafia king had just made it clear. Some vows change everything. Some vows leave no escape. And this one sound was hers. The room had changed. Or perhaps she had. Either way, the air felt heavier, more charged, as if every glittering chandelier and polished marble surface existed solely to remind her of the world she had stumbled into. She followed him, not consciously, not yet willingly, but inevitably. Every step he took seemed to carve a path, commanding space, bending the room to his presence. She realized, almost painfully, that she was no longer navigating the party on her own terms. She was navigating his world. "This isn't your place," he said quietly, almost conversationally, as they walked past a cluster of men who bowed their heads subtly, barely daring to meet his gaze. She wanted to argue. She wanted to protest that she didn't belong here, that she had no authority, no claim. But the truth pressed against her chest with undeniable force. She knew it. Before he said anything more, "You survive here," he continued, "by understanding the rules. And the first rule is this: power is never shared freely. It is taken, maintained, protected." She glanced at him, trying to read him, to find some vulnerability, some trace of softness that would make this world feel less like a gilded cage. But there was none. Only precision. Only control. Only the quiet understanding that he would not tolerate error. Not in himself. Not in anyone who walked into his domain. She swallowed, voice caught somewhere between awe and fear. "And me?" He looked at her then, and for a long moment, the rest of the room seemed to disappear. "You," he said softly, "exist because I allow it. Not because the world has mercy, not because chance brought you here. You are alive in this space because I've decided it so. That is the second rule." Her stomach twisted. The weight of it pressed against her ribs. A choice made for her, yet somehow protective. She felt it in the subtle shift of his stance, in the way his eyes swept over the room, calculating, anticipating every danger, every threat she might never see. "And if I don't follow the rules?" she asked, almost trembling. His gaze softened fractionally, not enough to betray weakness, but enough to anchor her. "Then the world would remind you of them," he said. "Brutally. Without mercy. But with me, the rules are different, safer, predictable, contained." The clarity hit her like a cold wind. Her life, her freedom, her very presence in this room, all hinged on understanding, obeying, and trusting the man whose reputation alone could crumble. Empires. She wanted to retreat, to reclaim independence. But the idea of navigating the glittering dangers, alone, without his shadow over her, felt suddenly impossible. "Do you understand?" he asked, voice low, almost intimate. She nodded, not just in acknowledgement, but in reluctant acceptance. Because she did understand. The world she had known was gone. His world had rules she didn't yet fully grasp, but they were rules she had no choice but to follow. And somewhere deep down, a part of her realized, for all its danger, for all its suffocating power, she was safer with him than without him. The ballroom continued its celebration, oblivious to the silent, unspoken pact forming in the shadowed corners. She walked beside him, aware of the truth she couldn't escape. In his world, survival was not about courage, it was about allegiance. And for tonight, her allegiance had already been chosen. The warmth of the ballroom felt deceptive now. Glittering lights, laughter, the clinking of glasses. It all existed like a fragile veneer, masking the true currents beneath. Because in his world, she had learned, power was never dormant. Danger was never idle. And tonight, the first ripple of that danger brushed against her like a cold wind. She was walking beside him, heels clicking softly against the polished marble, when the subtle shift reached her. The faintest tension in the air, the way a few men across the room stiffened, ever so slightly, the quiet glance exchanged between two suited men near the bar. They had noticed her. They had recognized her importance. And in that instant, she understood. The enemy had moved. Her pulse quickened. Not from fear alone, but from the realization that nothing about this night was accidental. Every glance he had given her, every calculated step, every whispered promise, it had all been leading to this. He sensed it too. A subtle tightening of his jaw, the tilt of his head, the way his eyes swept the room like a predator cataloging threats. He didn't speak, but she felt the command in the air. Watch, wait, survive. "You're aware," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the crowd, "that not everyone here celebrates your presence." She nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I think I understand." He stopped for a moment, turning to face her. And for the first time, the protective calm she had come to associate with him seemed to harden. "Understand this," he said softly, each word deliberate, weighted. "In this room, alliances shift faster than the music, and enemies, they move without warning. One wrong glance, one careless step, and consequences follow. Swift, relentless." Her stomach tightened. She realized that while she had been focused on him, on the power he wielded and the safety it promised, she had not considered the attention that came with it. The way people noticed what belonged to him, what now belonged, in a sense, to her. A man in a dark suit approached the periphery of the room, lingering just long enough for her to catch the edge of recognition. A familiar name whispered in half-forgotten rumors tied to unfinished vendettas. Her heart stuttered. He noticed her glance. His hand brushed hers, subtle but grounding. "Do not look afraid," he murmured. "Fear is expected, but hesitation is deadly. You survived this night because I've prepared, but the enemy will test you, and they will start small. Small." The word did nothing to calm her. She understood now that in his world, small was always strategic. Small was the first step toward devastation. The man in the dark suit lingered a heartbeat longer before melting back into the crowd, eyes never leaving hers. The message was clear. She had been noticed. She was vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, the first seeds of danger had been planted. She exhaled slowly, gripping her glass tighter. He was beside her, silent, commanding, unshakable. And yet she felt it. The pull of the risk, the undeniable truth of this world she had stepped into. "Stay close," he said softly, voice almost intimate. "I will shield you, but remember, protection does not mean invincibility. Not here, not tonight." And as the music swelled again, the laughter rose, and the lights sparkled brighter than ever, she realized the chilling certainty of his words. In his world, being seen meant being hunted, and tonight, the hunt had begun. The ballroom shimmered around her, but she no longer belonged to it. Every laugh, every toast, every glint of crystal seemed distant, filtered through a haze of awareness she couldn't escape. She had been careful, cautious, measured, but caution had a limit, and tonight, the edge of it pressed close. He was near, always near, a silent presence at her side that made her feel both protected and trapped. Each time she glanced at him, she caught that look, the one that balanced command with calculation, control with expectation. He didn't demand her compliance, he simply assumed it. And somewhere inside her, she realized she was no longer resisting. The first test came quietly, almost innocuously. A man from across the room, eyes sharp, a smirk too easy, stepped too close. She noticed him before he spoke, the way he leaned just enough to make his intentions clear. Her pulse quickened. This was the subtlety of the world she had stepped into. The challenge arrived disguised as courtesy. Before she could react, his hand was on hers. A touch so light it could have been accidental, yet firm enough to remind her of the silent boundary he maintained. She met his gaze. No words. Only the unspoken. Do not cross or face consequences you cannot foresee. But she did cross it. She stepped toward the man, lifted her chin, and met his calculated challenge with her own. Not with defiance, exactly, but with the faintest assertion of her own presence. The man paused, perhaps expecting hesitation, perhaps counting on her fear. But there was none. At least not the kind he expected. He smirked. He underestimated her. She realized then that the line she had been walking, between survival and obedience, was no longer about avoidance. It was about choice. She could act. She could assert herself. She could stake her claim in the dangerous currents swirling around her. The man faltered. He glanced toward him, toward the king, and in that instant, she understood the power she had stepped into. By simply moving, by simply asserting her presence, she had shifted the balance. Not entirely, not permanently, but enough to be noticed, enough to be marked. He didn't intervene. He didn't correct her. Instead, he observed, like always, calculating, measuring, deciding. And in his eyes, she saw the acknowledgement, you are learning, you are capable, but this is only the beginning. The music swelled, louder now, filling the gaps between the murmurs of the crowd. She realized the truth. The moment she crossed that line, she had ceased being a passive observer. She had stepped into a new role, one defined not by fear, but by awareness and choice. And the thrill was undeniable. Because in this world, every move had consequence. Every choice could save or destroy. And tonight, for the first time, she had taken control of one of those choices. He leaned closer, voice low, almost intimate. Good, he murmured. You've crossed the line. But remember, cross it wisely. Her chest tightened with anticipation. The line was crossed. The die was cast. And as the lights flickered, as the laughter echoed, and the orchestra played its haunting, delicate tune, she realized the truth she could not escape. Once you step into his world, there is no going back. The party hummed around them, oblivious to the tension that had quietly settled between the king and her. Crystal glasses tinkled. Laughter floated through the air, and the scent of pine mingled with expensive perfume. But she could no longer hear it as background. Every sound, every movement, every glance carried weight. Because she had learned painfully that in his world nothing was accidental. He walked beside her, steady, unyielding, his presence a shield she could feel pressing close. And yet, for the first time, she realized that protection came with a price. A cost measured not in money, but in vigilance, in sacrifice, in lives placed on the line without notice. A subtle movement caught her eye. Across the room, a figure lingered just beyond casual view, scanning, calculating, waiting. The king noticed it first, of course. He had seen it before she had predicted it before it arrived. His hand brushed hers lightly, a silent anchor, and she understood that the world she had entered was watching, and it was dangerous. You see them, he said quietly, his voice carrying only for her. Every threat, every challenge, they come for both of us, and they always start small, so you must trust me. She swallowed. And if you can't protect me? A flicker passed through his gaze, brief, human, almost imperceptible. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. I will protect you, he said steadily. But protection isn't free. It demands more than loyalty. It demands sacrifice. Sometimes my own, sometimes yours, sometimes both. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't imagined the subtle nods, the glances exchanged across the room, the quiet acknowledgments that danger was near. She had thought being near him was enough, that his power alone would create a shield. But now she realized it was not the shield itself that mattered. It was the constant cost of maintaining it, the vigilance that never wavered, the danger that could strike at any moment. A man approached, too deliberate to be casual, his eyes flicking to her before sliding back to the king. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she felt it, a ripple of tension running through the room, unnoticed by everyone else. She turned, instinctively, and saw the king's eyes lock on the intruder. One step, one movement, and the man faltered, the silent warning clear. "Do not test me." She realized then that she was not merely protected. She was part of a living equation of power, influence, and danger. And every moment of her safety came at a cost he bore with precision, and one she was only beginning to understand. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly, stepping closer. "You only need to understand. Every gesture, every move, every threat I neutralize is part of the promise I made." Her pulse raced. "A promise? To protect me?" He nodded, dark eyes unwavering. "Yes, but a promise comes with a price, and tonight you're beginning to see it." She realized then the terrifying, thrilling truth. In his world she was safe, but only because he was willing to risk everything. And for the first time she wondered, would she be willing to pay the cost as well? Because protection, she now understood, was never free. The ballroom glittered around her, but she barely noticed it anymore. The music, the laughter, the swirling gowns and suits, they were all background noise to the storm that had quietly taken residence inside her. A storm of fear, of fascination, and of a secret she had carried. Alone until now, she had managed to survive by being careful, by hiding the truth beneath layers of composure. No one had known. Not her friends, not her colleagues. Certainly not him. She had learned early that secrets were survival tools in a world that didn't forgive mistakes. But the closer she had come to him, the more the walls she had built began to feel like fragile paper against the weight of his attention. He was beside her now, his presence a silent anchor. She could feel the pull of his gaze even, without looking. And with each step, each movement, each subtle word he whispered, she felt the pressure, the quiet insistence that nothing could remain hidden. Not here, not tonight, not from him. The secret pressed against her chest, tight and insistent. A part of her wanted to confess, to release the weight that had haunted her for years. But the other part, the part that had survived, by being invisible, feared the consequences. Because in his world, even a whisper could ignite a storm. She turned slightly, brushing her fingers against the edge of a table, pretending to admire the ornaments. "There's something you don't know," she said, voice low, almost lost beneath the music. He tilted his head, curious, patient, but with the same unwavering intensity. "Then tell me," he said quietly. "Or do not. But understand, nothing stays hidden for long." Her heart raced. She wanted to step back, to retreat, to protect herself. But she also wanted, needed, to see if he could understand, if he could accept the truth, however fragile it was. "It's something from before," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Something that could change how you see me." He didn't flinch, didn't interrupt, just waited, a calm, steady presence that seemed impossible to resist. She inhaled, bracing herself. "I've been followed," she admitted finally, words spilling out despite her careful control. "Not here, not tonight. Before. There were threats. People I didn't know, watching, waiting. I didn't want anyone to know. Not my family, not friends, not you." His expression remained unreadable, but the subtle narrowing of his eyes told her he processed. Every word, every nuance, every implication. "You survived," he said finally, voice quiet, but edged with authority. "And you didn't let them see your fear. That tells me everything I need to know." Relief and tension collided in her chest. She had revealed the secret, but in doing so, she had not been punished. Instead, he had observed, assessed, and judged her capable. "You see," he continued, voice low, almost intimate, "secrets are powerful, but they're dangerous. Only when they are mismanaged. You've managed yours well. But now, it is my right to know." She swallowed, heart pounding. The balance had shifted. Her secret was no longer hers alone. It had become part of him, part of the silent understanding between predator and prey, protector and the protected, king and perhaps something more. And in that moment, she realized the truth she couldn't escape. Her secret had tied her closer to him than she had ever imagined. Because in his world, nothing stayed hidden. Not fear, not intention, not desire, and certainly not her. The room's glow had shifted from celebratory warmth to a tense, almost tangible hush. She noticed it before anyone else. The subtle stiffening of bodies, the way conversations had stilled, the faint intake of breath from those who sensed the imperceptible shift in the air. He moved through the space with the same controlled grace as always, but tonight, there was something different. A shadow behind his eyes, a tension beneath the tailored suit. The calm he radiated was intact, yes, but she could see the faint cracks, and that frightened her in a way she had not anticipated. A warning had arrived. Subtle, calculated. Not yet a threat, but close enough to taste. She felt it in her chest. The pulse of danger, the hum of power that could crush the unprepared. She stepped closer to him instinctively. Her presence, once tentative, had become intentional. A grounding force he neither asked for nor rejected. "You feel it too," she said quietly, voice low enough for only him to hear. He glanced at her, dark eyes sharp, assessing. A faint nod acknowledged what she already knew. Even kings bleed. Even men who command empires are not invincible. He didn't speak, letting the silence stretch. A calculated pause, an understanding that words could not carry the weight of the moment. She realized that in his world, vulnerability was a weapon and a liability, and right now, he was exposed. Not physically, not visibly, but in the quiet spaces between power and action, he was human. She wanted to reach for him, to touch, to offer something, anything that could ease the tension. But instinct told her to wait, to observe, to measure. Because in this world, rash action could be fatal. Then she saw it. A flicker in the corner of the room. A shadow moving with intent. Someone watching, someone calculating. The first real danger had arrived, and it was precise, targeted, and unseen by everyone else. He noticed it instantly. A subtle shift in stance, a quiet tightening of his jaw. The predator was ready, but this time the threat wasn't abstract, it was personal. "She's close," he murmured, almost to himself, the words heavy with both warning and acknowledgement. "And she doesn't know yet." Her pulse quickened. She realized the truth. His strength was vast, his empire formidable, but he was not untouchable, and in seeing that, she felt a mixture of fear and something else. Responsibility. The strange, unexpected weight of knowing that someone she had begun to trust, even care for, could be hurt, and that she could be helpless. He moved toward the source of the danger with effortless control, every step measured, every glance sharp. And in that moment she understood a truth that cut deeper than any weapon. Kings, no matter how feared, were human, and humans bled. Her breath hitched as the first signs of confrontation began, the room now a chessboard, and he, the unshakable, invincible king, was facing a move he could not ignore. She knew then, without question, that the next moments would define everything: trust, survival, and the fragile bond between predator and the one he vowed to protect. Because tonight, she realized, even the strongest could fall. And she was watching. The music had slowed to a soft, haunting melody, the kind that seemed to stretch time itself. The chandeliers above shimmered faintly, casting golden reflections across the polished marble floor. The world outside the ballroom might have been calm, but inside, the tension hummed like an electric current, subtle yet impossible to ignore. He stood near the center of the room, surveying the aftermath of the threat, every muscle taut, every movement precise. The king, Italy's most feared mafia, was unyielding. Yet she saw what no one else could: the quiet weight of responsibility pressing on him, the faint shadow of doubt that even he could not dismiss entirely. She stepped forward, hesitant at first, then with growing resolve. The last hours had changed everything. She had seen his power, his control, the way he moved through danger as if he commanded it itself. She had felt his protection, understood his rules, and now she was ready to confront the truth behind his promise. He noticed her approach, eyes locking with hers. For a moment, the room seemed to dissolve, leaving only the two of them, surrounded by silent understanding. He did not speak. He did not need to. The weight of the whisper he had given, the promise she had heard and feared, hung between them like a living thing. "You stayed," he said finally, voice low and deliberate. "Despite everything, despite the danger, you stayed." She swallowed, heart pounding. "I had to," she admitted, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Because I realized it wasn't just about fear. It wasn't just about survival. It was about trust. And I trust you." For the first time, the faintest curve of his lips softened, almost imperceptible. "A dangerous thing to admit," he murmured. "But the truth is rarely safe." Her pulse quickened. "And your promise?" she asked softly. "Was it just words?" He shook his head slowly. "Not words," he said. "A vow, and a warning. You are no longer just a guest in my world. You are part of it. And that means you have a choice. The choice to stay, fully, knowing everything it entails, or to leave, knowing that stepping back may be safer, but it will never be the same." She paused, the enormity of his words sinking in. Every lesson, every threat, every protection he had offered over the night had led to this moment. She could feel the weight of the world he ruled pressing down, not crushing, but demanding acknowledgement. And beneath that weight, she felt a strange exhilaration. "I stay," she said firmly, meeting his gaze. "Not out of fear, not because I have no other options. I stay because I choose you, your world, your rules, and your promise." He nodded once, sharply, approvingly. "Then know this," he said, voice low, but carrying the full gravity of his power. "From this moment, my world protects you, my world obeys you, and my vow cannot be broken." The music swelled, lights reflecting like fire across the walls. She realized the truth, the night, the threat, the danger. It had all led to this singular, unbreakable promise. And as she stood there, beside him, she understood fully what it meant to be seen, to be chosen, and to be bound not by fear, but by a vow that would last far beyond this Christmas night. Because in his world, some promises could not be escaped. The Christmas party ended without announcement. Guests drifted away beneath falling snow, laughter trailing into the Roman night, unaware that history, quiet, personal history, had just been written inside those gilded walls. The chandeliers dimmed. The orchestra packed away its instruments, and still she remained. Not because she was asked, because she chose to stay. The world felt different now. Not louder, not brighter, quieter, focused. As if everything unnecessary had fallen away, leaving only truth behind. She stood beside him, no longer on the edge of the room, no longer pretending she didn't belong. She belonged because she decided she did. He watched her with a gaze that no longer assessed or tested. It acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement, something rare settled between them. Mutual understanding. "You've crossed every threshold tonight," he said calmly. "Most people run from this world the moment they see its teeth." She lifted her chin. "I didn't come here looking for a throne." A faint smile touched his mouth. "No," he agreed. "That's why you deserve one." The words didn't thrill her the way she might have expected. They grounded her. Because power, she had learned, wasn't about dominance. It was about clarity. About standing still while the world adjusted around you. "You're not owned," he continued, voice firm but measured. "You were never claimed. Everything that happens from this moment forward happens because you choose it." She believed him. Not because of his reputation. Not because of fear. Because all night, when he could have commanded, he had offered choices instead. She stepped closer, not into his shadow but beside him. An equal presence, even if the world wasn't ready to name it yet. "What happens now?" she asked. He looked out over the empty ballroom, over a kingdom of quiet power and unseen boundaries. "Now," he said, "you learn how to rule without losing yourself, and I ensure no one ever takes that from you." Outside, snow fell softly over Rome, blanketing old streets and ancient empires alike. The city didn't know her name yet, but it would, because queens were not born in crowns. They were forged in moments like this, when fear was acknowledged, power was understood, and choice was claimed without apology. She took one last look at the fading lights, then turned toward the future waiting just beyond the doors. Not as a girl who wandered into a world she didn't understand, but as a woman who walked out knowing exactly who she was. And beside Italy's most feared mafia king, she stepped into the night. Not protected, not possessed, but powerful. Because the most dangerous promise of all had already been fulfilled. She had chosen the throne. And this time, there was no escape. She wanted more. And so the story of a Christmas night that changed everything comes to a close. But the journey doesn't end here. If you felt the tension, the danger, the thrill of every whispered vow, if you felt her fear, her courage, and the pull of a world where power and desire collide, then don't let this be the last time we share a story like this. Subscribe now, and join us for more tales of passion, suspense, and secrets that leave you breathless. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment when danger and romance collide, and step into worlds you didn't know you were ready for. Because every story has a next chapter, and the next one could